Hi, welcome back to the People Data for Good podcast. I'm here with Meisha-ann Martin. Meisha-ann, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic to be talking to you on this Friday. So, hey, if you would, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Meisha-ann Martin, and I am an industrial organizational psychologist. I've been doing this work for quite some time, almost 2 decades. Currently, I am the Senior Director of People Analytics and Research at Workhuman on the Workhuman IQ team, which is our analytics team.
Now, Meisha-ann, you've been doing this for a while, and I am honored to be speaking with you. You are a virtuous person. You are also someone who actually puts these virtues, these good ideas into action. Because it's not only being a good person, as we discussed on Fafal Live last week. It's really about taking appropriate action. So, if you would, I'd like to step back and, how did you get here, to senior
Yeah.
director, of, people analytics and research at Workhuman? I mean, what were some of your motivations? What's your background?
Yeah, so that's quite the story. I am originally Jamaican, born and raised, and I came to the United States for college in 1996. When I got here, I realized, Al, that all of a sudden I was Black. I didn't, it's not something I ever really thought about living in Jamaica. And so, I think this journey really started with me coming to grips with my own identity in this new country. And I started studying diversity topics way back then in undergrad and continued that in college. As I did that and started to educate myself, I realized that there were really differences in opportunity for different types of people. And I wanted to make a difference. And so I kind of resolved to um, be that person to help use data, analytics, measurement to make HR practices more objective. I felt like the more objective we could make decision making, the less bias would creep in, and then we could hold ourselves accountable by measuring that. And that's how I started. That's how I started on this career path. I've done it with starting with employee selection, and then I went on to employee experience and engagement surveys. And then I just went broader with, life cycle analytics.
Well, with your background coming from Jamaica, can you
Hmm.
speak to, you mentioned it right at the outset, you realized that you were a Black woman in a
Yes.
different place. And
Yes.
we celebrate in America itself being a melting pot, where,
Yeah.
and like it's a good thing. However, as we know, there is prejudice, there is racism in our society that has to be acknowledged and dealt with. So, my question to you is when you came over, I imagine, was it a shock? And how did you, deal with it? Did you have a friend group that you connected with? How did you navigate, particularly early on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually had a really soft landing because I went to an HBCU. So that's a historically Black college university. And so, in essence, before I had to acclimate to, America at large, I was first acclimating to other Black people,
Mm.
right? Blacks from here, Blacks from Africa. And it allowed me to slowly acclimate to the broader context. So, I am so grateful to HBCUs in general and my particular HBCU, Morgan State, because I landed in a safe space that allowed me to take baby steps in terms of that broader acclimation.
I got chills as you were saying that because we do very little alone in life. We walk,
Yes.
we chew, we eat, but even the ground we walk on, if it's concrete or wood or something, somebody else laid that down, as you well know, and being very aware of others' contributions, and particularly, correct me if I'm wrong, based on your experience, at a young age, the value of peers, the value of inclusion and belonging. What I'm taking away is that you felt included, that you felt like you were in a place that you belong. Is that fair?
I did. And one of the things they did was they strategically paired me with another Jamaican from my roommate so that I had a built in support system even as I was acclimating to the African American culture, right, which wasn't exactly my culture either. So, yes, that support network is super, super important.
And particularly at that juncture of life, right? You're
Mhm.
starting to individuate, you're getting out
Yes.
on your own. And, we're going to have to come back to this because that obviously relates to what organizations can and should be doing to
Yes.
create this sense of belonging and safety. Actually, I'm just going to let you respond to that real quick. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so one of the constructs that are of big interest right now to lots of people, including Workhuman, is this idea of psychological safety. We've all been going through a lot in this past year, 2 years, going on 3 years. And when times get tough, that support system is even more important, right? And so psychological safety creates the space for people to seek the support they need in organizations. And our research says that we're not doing that well in terms of psychological safety. On one of our surveys last year, on a scale of 1 to 5, the average was only 3.47. And furthermore, some people were significantly lower than that, some groups. So women were lower, parents were lower, and non whites were lower. So, arguably, the people that needed the most to be able to be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm really struggling here, I need additional support. Think about all the things that parents went through, during the pandemic. We were serving those people the least. So, there's a real opportunity to do better overall and to do better for the people that need it the most.
With that in mind, how does that happen? I mean, psychological safety is simple, if you will,
Yes,
to get your head around. However, to put it in practice, as a habit, whether you be a leader or a colleague or
mhm,
otherwise, is a different challenge. And then in turn, to do it at scale and make it part of
right,
your team's culture or organizational culture is yet another challenge.
right.
Thoughts on how to make that happen?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, like, how did the miss happen in the first place? This is why I'm so passionate about analytics. I think companies miss a lot because they don't measure it. So, how many companies are measuring how safe people feel? We happen to have found this because we studied it. So, organizations should get in the discipline of holding themselves accountable for providing the same positive experience to all kinds of people in the organization. How do we improve it? How do we actually make psychological safety happen in organizations? I believe that the relationship between an individual and their leader is the building block of their experience with an organization. And I like to refer to this term that I coined called the generous check in, which means checking in frequently, checking in genuinely, asking people how they're doing on a frequent cadence, and also being vulnerable yourself so that people feel like if they're struggling, if they've made a mistake, if they have something tough to say, that they can say that because you have modeled that behavior appropriately as a leader.
Yeah, I love it. I also acknowledge that many don't have the skills or experience to hold space for another
Yes.
in that way. And that takes knowledge and practice. And, I'll
Right.
come back to that in a second. I also acknowledge, too, the reality, and maybe our listeners are thinking the same thing insofar as that we all are constrained by time. So if we
Right.
have, 5 meetings a day, and those meetings are supposed to be 50 minutes to an hour, and some are going to be group meetings, some are going to be individual meetings. If we spend all the time talking about our feelings and being vulnerable, that's how we would spend the whole day, and if not more. So correct me if I'm wrong again, and I'm saying that a lot for some reason, but um,
Oh, I'll correct you. It's fine.
it's how to allocate ample time so it's just not transactional, that it's truly
Mhm.
authentic, but also having the ability to focus on the work that needs to be done as well, so
Yeah.
finding that balance. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and frankly, Al, I think we've made a mistake. I think that in general, we tend to focus on the things that need to be done, like the tasks and the performance and the outcomes. And don't get me wrong, those things are important, but those things are accomplished by people. And so if we're focusing on the things and not focused on the people, that's terrible strategy because the people are not going to do the things. So in order to get the things done, you focus on the people. And as a leader, your job in enabling the people to do the things are your job, right?
Mhm.
So that is and should be your primary focus. It's not something that you should, scrape time out for as a luxury. It is what you should be doing as a matter of course and as your primary priority. And if you do that, the things will come, the outcomes will come because the people are not only satisfied, but they're thriving.
Now, I 100% agree with you. If I am some macho dude, I might
Mhm.
go, "Hey, I don't want to be friends with everybody. I people just gotta do what they're told and just get after it. And I don't,
Mhm.
we don't have time. And again, I'm being playing a role a little bit and being cynical, but how to address those types of folks who just might not be there yet. We can say this until we're blue in the face, but there has to be some impetus for them to open up and change, their behavior. Or, is
Mhm.
there an element of that way of being that is appropriate in some circumstances? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I think it is always productive to be execution oriented, but it is a real needed mindset shift to realize that, we accomplish those things through people. And so I think for people that are resistant, it's the evidence that really helps. And that's why I love research. So when you're talking about somebody who is execution and outcome oriented, you can look to, for example, the studies that have to do with psychological safety and quality. So if somebody is not comfortable pointing out to you something that might be wrong and something that might cause a bigger issue, that's an inefficiency. That's an outcome that is now compromised. That's something that may have to be redone. And so you can link the feeling stuff to the outcome stuff with good, solid research and evidence.
So Jeffrey Pfeffer,
I love him.
so do I. He had great fortune of he was a keynote at our conference here in San Francisco in January 2020, right before COVID hit.
Mhm.
And he, of course, is the author of many books, among them "Dying for a Paycheck" and "The Knowing Doing Gap." And the knowing doing gap conceptually is what I want to ask you about because yes, I agree with you. If we measure and analyze dynamics within the workforce and how people are thinking and feeling, we can make,
Mhm.
better decisions, and we can highlight some opportunities for improvement. Particularly if we're measuring those ongoing, we can see, shifts and so forth. However, when we bring insight to the fore, and this is happening and has happened over the past several years in the political realm, the insight, no matter how evidence-based it is, no matter how high the R squared or confidence interval, whatever it is, um, it's still not carrying the day sometimes. So
Correct.
we have to package and communicate these insights more effectively. If you agree, what are some of the ways that you've either seen insights communicated effectively, or what would you advocate be done?
So I think the insights only create the motivation, which is the beginning. So, you have to do that in a persuasive format. And what is most persuasive depends on who you're talking to. You can't convince everybody the same way. So you have to kind of get to know your audience and tailor that accordingly. But I think the missing step, which is why action often doesn't come from that insight and that increased motivation, is because we fail to address the idea of self efficacy. We don't tell people how. So I'll give you a specific example. I think we failed a lot of our leaders and our first time leaders, for example. Like, when was the last time you heard of an organization training a manager how to do a good one-on-one. So we tell people create a space, enhance psychological safety, but we don't sometimes we just don't give them the tips for how. Something just as simple as a one-on-one template. Here's an agenda. Here's a little job aid. For example, something that I do with my team every week is we do best of, worst of, and then best thing you ate for fun. What is the best thing that happened to you this week? It could be work or personal. What is the worst thing that happened to you? It could be worst thing or personal. And then tell me about something you ate. And even that just structure, it sounds silly, but providing that structure for people can fill the gap of the how so that they can move from, okay, I'm motivated to do this thing to now I know how to do this thing.
I'm gonna take that slash steal that. Actually, I'm gonna ask permission to use that. So,
You can use it.
and now I would like to do a follow-up survey with all our community members and listeners to see who else adopts that approach. It's fantastic, and what came to mind as you shared it, it it uh, it creates authentic conversation and feelings because I think in many cultures around the world, in fact, there is research to this that I recall hearing, that food is an expression of love and connection.
Yes.
And so, if we're talking about food, it humanizes the interaction, and so I
Yes.
celebrate that. And again, I'm taking it straight away. I might do that, this afternoon. But what you're talking about with the guides and tips and so forth. Tell me more about what that looks like, because people would then have to have some receptivity to nudging themselves and doing
Hmm.
things maybe a little bit different based on the different people that they are interacting with, because I don't have to tell you that particularly given your background that people are different. We have certain predispositions, we have life experiences, that so we can't cookie cutter our approach to people. So as an individual, remaining open to different ways to interact. So again, the pointed question, interacting with these tips and guides, what would you advocate a process be to keep people or pry people in some cases open to adopting some of these ways of doing things differently?
I think you can give people options, right? So, for example, some people are more free flowing and you can just give them bullets to cover. Some people might need, like prompt or questions. Some people might need a structured template that they type into. If you give people the different options that can conceivably achieve the same outcomes, then people can choose what works best for them and eventually evolve into their own style, which is actually the best because it's the most genuine and the most authentic.
Yeah, well, I love it. And these guides, there's so much popular literature out there, from Brene Brown, Sean Aker, we mentioned Jeffrey Pfeffer, and
Mhm.
so and the Power of Habit and Charles Duhigg, and there's a bunch of great stuff. Susan David just came out with the book Emotional Agility, and talking
Mhm.
about emotional stratification. I don't think that's the right word, but the idea that our emotions don't define us, that we have the ability to
Mhm.
experience different emotions at the same time, so we can feel both good and sad at the same time, which has been really eye-opening for me. So what I'm getting at is this, is that all these researchers and thought leaders and authors have these great ideas, but a lot of those practices, a lot of that knowledge does not come to life within organizations. It becomes
Right.
like, okay, that's self-help and that's just personal. Yet,
Mhm.
organizations then, have a different culture, different way of being. And historically it's been, hey, this is the way it's done here. And if you don't like it, you can, ship out. But
Or worse.
organizations now are struggling to keep talent, as you know, attract talent. So the cost of not adopting more evolved, progressive ways of doing things is increasingly real. So to wrap this around, to what extent would a individual manager or leader adopt some of this new ways of thinking that's constantly being generated and constantly being socialized, like through Brene Brown's podcast, for example. That someone hears something, but the workplace isn't responding. So what would it be like if there's a future where, hey, there's new research and this, we're going to adopt this, and so
Mhm.
the time from knowledge to actually making it pervasive in a certain organization gets shrunk down. So the ability to customize is ultimately what I'm getting at. Do you think there's room for that?
I do think there's room for that. I think, there's a lot of information out there now, and it can be really overwhelming. I think for someone who is trying to improve in the area of leadership, maybe one thing to do is to try one new thing that you've heard about every week
Mm.
and see how it lands. Did that work for you and your team? Did it fit in your organization? If it seemed to have gone positively, try it again. Try to make it a habit. Try to fit it to you and your team. Then when you feel comfortable with that, add something else. Because I think again to the point of self-efficacy, I think people get overwhelmed, right? Like which of this advice should I take? How should I incorporate it? And it often turns unfortunately into inaction.
Well, thank you for saying that, because the idea that an organization creates a leadership development strategy or learning strategy, and they high five and say, okay, we're done, and just
Right.
move on is not appropriate. And I've seen over the years that kind of be the case. And I just became aware of just yesterday that the whole talent development group in one prominent organization they just got evaporated. They were told to go,
Wow.
and because they weren't delivering, and it was based on the fact that, and again, this is hearsay, and I'm going to learn more about it. But what I heard clearly was that they were just taking legacy models that were
Mhm.
being kind of replicated time and again. Well, we did this at our last employer, therefore we're going to do it at this employer, and it just wasn't carrying the day because it wasn't agile or nimble enough. So, as we enter this we're already in it, this reality of remote work and hybrid work, and we're still going to be evolving over the years ahead. And when we talk about new normal, I don't know if you know what that means. Please let me know. But it's like we have to be adapting. We have to learn and improve. So my point of question again is, how would you advocate leaders think differently? Because for me, I see like learning and diversity, equity, inclusion, and talent acquisition being in silos oftentimes, and they're not creating a true end-to-end employee experience. Like what's being sold about the experience with an employer is often different than the reality once somebody comes in. So,
Yeah.
how do you shrink that delta, and deliver on your promises?
Yeah. So one of my favorite books is Work Rules,
Mm.
and I like it because do you have it? I like it because of the idea. Oh my gosh, Laszlo Bach. I love it.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites, and
Yeah.
I find it really inspirational. I think that with a lot of these things, we throw stuff at the wall and we don't experiment and measure to see what's working. And so I think one of the new ways that we can evolve right now as we're moving towards a different time is to get really good at that. The hybrid workforce is not the same as, fully remote or fully on site. What are the differences? What do people need that's different? How do people respond to communications and messaging based on how they work? All of these things are things that we need to get really disciplined at asking and answering.
Yeah, I love it. We're gonna have to put together a reading list based on our discussion here. So, hey, I want to step back because congratulations, you got recently promoted. And so,
Thank you.
tell us about your role there at Workhuman, and specifically some of the research projects that you either like to highlight or what you have planned to work on here in the near future.
Yeah. So I lead a team of analysts that are dedicated to showing the impact of human-centered practices and technology. So essentially, and specifically, what we do is we link data from our Workhuman cloud, so or social recognition, or continuous performance management, or celebration suite. We link data from that to talent and business outcomes. And some of my favorites are the studies that we do that show that our technologies change the way that people feel in a way that others can see and we can measure and show based on the outcomes we're looking at. Like when you do a study that shows that customer satisfaction increases as a result of social recognition or patient satisfaction or safety or productivity, those are really exciting because that is the evidence that how people feel matters, not just because it matters how they feel, but because, it drives other things. So in terms of what we're working on, we are really proud that we focus on things that matter at the moment. So not only do we do our work with our independent clients and look across our database, we do our own independent research as well. And so now we are focused on research that will give HR and leaders information on how do we function in this new normal, so to speak. What are the differences in terms of needs and outcomes for the different ways that people work. So that's what we're focusing on right now.
Absolutely love it. And embedded in that is the reality that any HR leader or business leader, well, HR leaders are business leaders, so I don't want to get called out on that. So, but any leader is, they have their, what I would call structure of interpretation, their
Mhm.
educational experience, their employment experience, their relationships that have formed how they view the world. And that world is changing at an ever increasing rate, as I'm sure you'll agree and listeners will agree. So the ability to learn appropriately at speed, at scale is absolutely critical. And then it
Mhm.
invites then the question, what am I learning? And for what purpose? What action am I going to take? So my question results in, who's the audience for your research? And you alluded to it a little bit at the outset. I really want to focus on the second part, is what actions do you hope they take as a result?
Yeah. So the answer to the first question is every single person in the whole entire world. If you are an employee, we want you to know what work could look like, right? These are the things that you should be seeking for yourself. I'm really proud that the cutting edge research that we do is not just available to our clients. Anybody can go onto our website under the resources section and see all our case studies or papers and have access to our research. So our audience is pretty much everybody. What do we hope people will do? We hope that they will implement, based on our research, human centered practices for leading and engaging people at work. Things like inclusive recognition programs. So, appreciating people at work for who they are and what they bring to work, for their accomplishments outside of work, and doing that equally across groups, as an example.
Yeah, I'm getting really excited about a lot of things, and I'm gonna I'm gonna have to check myself a little bit because as a partner, as a fan of research,
Mhm,
I have a lot of ideas that are emerging, and let me just take off of one real quick because you
mhm,
know, if I'm a leader, I'm getting bombarded with content. I'm getting bombarded with infographics and
mhm,
articles, and people want my attention. All fine and
mhm,
good. So, to identify the content and research that is most relevant to the system for which I am responsible at that point of time is
mhm,
really important. And let me explain further before I let you respond. Uh, I grew up professionally in the 90s, and I had a fantastic role at Gap in the early 2000s, which led me into the people analytics workforce planning world. And it was the case where at the time everything was about GE,
Hmm.
PepsiCo. It's like,
Oh my
GE
gosh,
way.
yes.
It's like, so it was hard to escape it because many executives had either come through GE or PepsiCo. And so there
Mhm.
was a lot of historical inertia. And so the ideas that had to come to the fore almost had to go through that gateway, go through that lens. And oftentimes, like GE and PepsiCo, consumer product company and industrial manufacturer, weren't appropriate for retail. Yeah, it
Right.
just the mindset. So there has to be a level of creativity. So what I'm getting at, do
Mhm.
you believe that there is, when a leader prioritizes research, that they have a responsibility to themselves and those that they serve to curate the content and research that's most appropriate for the system for which they're responsible, including analyzing and researching that system itself?
I don't know, Al. Like, I'm a fan of consuming more rather than
Mhm.
less and keeping an open and questioning mind. So I wouldn't say to, limit yourself at the offset. I would say consume as much as you reasonably can,
Mhm.
but then ask yourself the critical questions of, will this fit here
Mhm.
and why?
Mhm.
I think just that process of asking those questions really encourages innovation and creativity rather than staying in a pretty narrow lane.
No, I actually love what you shared right there, and thank you, because it is the case where we have, the advantage of diverse perspectives and ideas, coming
Yeah,
from different industries, and so that constant refresh and challenging of norms,
yeah,
absolutely has to happen. What I'm trying to get to is your research specifically.
yeah.
How would you distinguish your research from other research that's out there?
Yeah, I would say that we have access to one of the best databases in the world of how people interact with each other at work. So, when I did Puffal, we put up or we put up our client slides, and we've got some of the best brands and some of the best cultures as our clients. And we don't just have part of those organizations, we have the entirety of those organizations. So we have tens of millions of data points and language around how people interact with each other at work. And I think that that access to that data plus the people that are analyzing that data. So I haven't really talked a lot about our analytics team, but our analytics team is stellar. We've got a whole team focused on analyzing language. We've got a team about that focuses on user experience, and we deliberately hire people from different analytics backgrounds so that we're truly multidisciplinary. So when you match that talent with that fantastic, amazing data set, we know a lot of things. And we have a lot of power to do great research, and we do.
And yes, you do. I saw some of it last week, and it's one of the reasons I reached out because I've been a fan, and we've talked about doing something like this together for a long time, and here we are. So yeah, thank you, and keep doing the great work that you are doing, you and your team are doing. And so I want to talk a little bit about the future and where you believe we're headed, both what's hopeful and what's scary.
Yeah.
Because here we are in February 2022, and I frankly thought we'd be further ahead on some fronts.
Mhm.
However, on other fronts, there's worthwhile celebrations to be had. And so, where do you believe we are, and what are some of the opportunities that you think or feel that we need to be taking advantage of moving forward?
Yeah, I think this trend towards hybrid working, in one sense, makes diversity easier, and in another sense, makes diversity and inclusion harder. And I think that is one of the bigger challenges that faces us. And so I'll explain. In a lot of places, when you were doing fully on-site work and people weren't open to remote working, you were limited by the demographics of where your organization was. And so I think now with that increased flexibility and with fully remote, that you can recruit from a broader demographic area and get different types of people into the workplace. However, that now means that we have to address the environment. And as I mentioned before, our research is showing that the environment is not feeling the same for everybody.
Mhm.
So, lower psychological safety for some groups. In one of our surveys, we found that most of our people who are intending to look for a new job were parents. Blacks were the most likely to say they wanted more flexibility, and that's the reason that they were looking for a new job. There was this fantastic article in the New York Times about, Black women not wanting to return to the workplace because they wanted a respite from those microaggressions. So now it's time for us to have a reckoning about the environment that we're creating so that everyone feels comfortable, not just comfortable, but happy, passionate, thriving at work. Because it is my fear that the people on site will start to look far less diverse than we had before the pandemic. And also that the people that are not on site all the time will kind of become second class, organizational citizens. So we've got to be really, really thoughtful about how we proceed to this next phase.
Well, I want to ask you about returning to the workplace, what microaggressions look like. And before
Mhm.
I do, and what we can do about it to prevent that from happening, uh, the it said, and I'm not going to get this perfectly correct, but tourism walks arm in arm with peace. And that seems maybe random because it is. but but the essence is this is that when we were together in the workplace, there was the chance to mingle, to run into
Right.
somebody and get to know them. Yet in many cases, we're isolated and we're seeing people through a screen. So the ability to connect is lessened. And Aaron Hurst, founder and CEO of Imperative, has a great narrative on this around our uh, peripheral. We have our core relationships, but kind of the
Right.
second tier has been compromised in
Mhm.
since the pandemic hit. So going back to the idea of returning to workplace and microaggressions and the fact that we haven't been tourists, we've been with our kind of core group, and oftentimes that's not
Right.
as diverse as the broader workforce is or will
Mhm.
be. Do you see risk and opportunity in that return to workplace? And if so, what can be done about it?
I do think, there's both. There is risk and there is opportunity. I think this is a time for us to be a lot more thoughtful in terms of, the things we're doing to attract and retain and making sure that they work for everyone. So I'll go back to the idea of experimenting and measuring outcomes. That's to me what being thoughtful means,
Hmm.
trying things and seeing if they work and seeing if they work for different types of people.
Yeah. I, Microaggressions, when I hear that, I makes me sad because
Yeah, it is
I
sad.
can imagine how it makes someone feel, and it
Mhm.
also the person who is making a microaggression, if that's the right way to put the words together, sometimes might not be doing so consciously, um,
Right.
or they could be doing consciously. So,
Mhm.
what are some thoughts around on both sides of that equation? How can someone become more aware of how they're showing up, particularly to not only Black people in our society, but
Mhm.
women and others?
Yeah. So I think psychological safety is the answer here, right? Because what needs to happen is people need to speak up and say, hey, that was not so cool, right? And that requires an environment that makes you feel safe to do that. And then the person on the other end of that should not be defensive and should have, an open mind to hearing what that person is saying and for bonus points, should practice not doing that behavior anymore and asking for an accountability partner to check
Mm,
them to make sure that's not happening.
yeah.
So some of the specifics that, I sometimes see, um, this is so apparent on Zoom sometimes even more than in person. But and there's research around this. Women getting interrupted a lot, or not getting a lot of speaking time in meetings, or not having their ideas credited to them. Or my favorite, this is sarcasm, when a woman has a great idea, you know, a male in the room acts like they're surprised. Like, that's a really good idea. I know, but why are you surprised though?
Mm, wow.
So it's the small things that are like, paper cuts to the soul.
Wow. I mean, I would love to see data on that, but I would venture to say
Mhm.
that the great majority, and I'm talking like 80, 90% of men would be unaware that that is
Yes.
happening. And
Yeah.
that, again, is both sad, but therein lies a great opportunity for men in that example to become more self-aware. And then it invites
Right.
the question, is that self-awareness going to be driven by their self and their own journey, or is the organization going to have a role in elevating that self-awareness? Because many leadership development programs that would have this type of exercise or content would be exclusive to leaders. However, this is happening throughout an organization. So, do you think this type of uh, self awareness can or should be prodded or inspired by the organization or enabled, I guess is the best word, by the organization? And if so, I would imagine it would have to be for all employees, not just leadership. Yeah.
I would agree with that. So the organization can tell individuals what kinds of things to look out for, what kinds of behaviors are not okay, and then create an environment that's psychologically safe so that when things like that happen in real time, that individuals are comfortable speaking up and not always the person that's affected. That is the best part, right? Because I think the people that are impacted, they kind of get tired of speaking up. And so when the organization creates this awareness that, hey, these behaviors are not okay, it creates an opportunity for other people to speak up and to advocate for that person instead of that person always having to advocate for
Hmm.
themselves.
Gosh, I'm having a lot of thoughts on what can be done to improve, and I've seen many a gap in an HR or people strategy, in this regard, and because many organizations and are focusing on skills, and again,
Hmm.
it's great, right? We're able to see skills more clearly, not only inside our organization but outside the organization. It's top of mind as organizations are doing workforce planning. However, but when we talk about attracting talent, retaining talent, behaviors carry the day, arguably. I wouldn't even say arguably. I consciously, for the record, don't use soft skills because I think that term was created by a bunch of dudes who wanted to belittle feminine traits, of which they did not have. So they tried to
It's,
m- shrink it down. Again, that's my own narrative. But where I want to go with this is that number one, I celebrate that you're talking about and analyzing and encouraging elevated awareness around behaviors, what to do about them, and the value of
mhm.
improving a culture, improving behaviors, at scale. As we move forward through time, what do you hope not only HR does, but leadership teams in general do? I've heard, yes, do research or consider research,
Mhm.
study your own workforce. However, the idea of bringing these formerly disparate processes of talent acquisition in with learning, in with comp, all these, again, things that need to be done. Do you think there's room to improve, governance and the forums in which these topics are discussed and insight taken and decisions made? Do you think there's improvement to be had there?
Yeah, I do. And I think that, one of the things that needs to happen more, it's starting to happen a little bit now, but is increased transparency. I remember when I was doing this work about 10 years ago. And I don't know, maybe it's just the way organizations are. They like to put a positive spin on things, you know? And so there is a need for the organization as well to say, hey, here's where we are with this. It's not where we want to be. Hey, ERGs, we actually kind of need some help. We need some suggestions. We're disappointed that this turned out the way it did. We acknowledge that we don't have, enough diversity in leadership. What do we need to do? I think those conversations need to evolve. Sometimes what happens is, organizations say, well, we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this. And the tone is a little like, all right,
Right.
okay, instead of like more of a two-way conversation,
Oh, 100%, yes. And thank you for calling that out, because there is a case where if there's not the openness to learn and explore and admit that certain initiatives didn't work out as planned, yeah, I've seen many leader kind of get too close to that project or whatever the investment might have been, because they're fearful that if it didn't work, it's going to cost them their job, it's going to make them look bad, or what have you, when in fact, it's an opportunity to learn and improve. Not everything is going to be a home run. So, with that in mind, yeah, do you agree that there needs to be an elevated level of openness, maybe in some leadership teams, to have that growth mindset?
I do. I definitely do. I think that, leadership teams need to be more comfortable with saying, hey, that wasn't okay, or that didn't work, or we tried it and we failed. And, it's back to psychological safety again. If the highest ranked people in the organization, if the highest
You got
echelons, how do you say
it.
that of leadership are comfortable, you know, admitting to mistakes, then everybody else will as
Yeah.
well.
Well, I love it. And so we have a handful of minutes here, maybe 8 or so. There's a couple topics I want to discuss before we wrap. Number one is, what's your advice to young people? Because we've talked about the organization, we've talked about HR, we've talked about measurement and research.
Yeah,
Uh, but young people, those in career transition, those entering this new world of work, that they don't have the kind of legacy stuff that they have to unlearn, so to speak. But what would you
yeah,
advise that they do to develop themselves to be prepared for what is the future of work?
yeah. I think, first of all, work is such an important part of life. And we've gotten so many weird messages about that. I feel like if you come from a low income background, the message is just get a good job. Just get a good job. And good is defined as making a lot of money, not necessarily as a job that feeds your soul and is meaningful and makes your life better and makes you feel like you're contributing to the world. So the first thing I would say is kind of choose wisely, like what is your passion in this world? How do you want to leave your mark and make your stamp, and what kind of career and job would fulfill that? Not just what you're good at, because sometimes what you're good at is not necessarily what you enjoy. I know, for example, right now tech is a hot space, and all these people are saying, oh, I just want to be in tech. But what do you want to do in tech and why?
Hmm.
Ask yourself those really tough questions. And I think that will set people up for a long and meaningful career and not just ticking off the days until you retire.
Well, if I am young and I have the whole world in front of me,
Hmm.
the idea of getting a good job and entering the workforce is can be daunting, and it is daunting,
Right.
and particularly young people can get paralyzed. What do I major in? Where do I go to school? What certification do I do? Hey, that company's down the street, therefore I should, maybe apply to them. So, how would you advocate? And this could not only be young people, but those who are
Yeah.
older as well. How would you advocate someone find their passion and explore the opportunities that are out there?
Yeah. Try as many different things as you
Hmm.
can. Those summer jobs, take a different one every
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
If you're doing internships in undergrad, try different things out. That's your opportunity. when you're on these internships, go outside the department that you're assigned and talk to different people and ask questions. I personally wish I had done more of that, in my internship. And then if you choose something and you try it out and you realize you don't like it, don't be afraid to change
Mhm.
paths. And this is going to sound weird coming from a PhD, but like maybe don't go to college just to go to college. I don't know. Know what it is that you're going for and what it is you want to do. And if you don't know yet, take some time to figure that out. Oh my gosh, parents are going to hate me. Trade schools, those are an option. The trades, we undersell the trades here in the US, I think, and those might be a really meaningful career path for some
Well,
people.
as a parent, I love that you're saying it. So no, I couldn't agree more, and I thank you for saying that because it's important to be heard, particularly given the cost of college. Is it appropriate?
Right.
There's this social status associated with it, which oftentimes is misapplied.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to your point too, is the trades are often very appropriate given someone's interests and skills and abilities,
Right,
and there's
right.
gross undersupply of
Yeah.
workers in many of those roles. So yeah, no, your point is extremely, well taken. And Meisha-ann, I could talk to you all day. Absolutely could. And we could
Thank
cite your
you.
research for days and weeks ahead. So yeah, as we wrap here, how can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing there at Workhuman?
Yeah, so they can learn about me from my LinkedIn page. And my name is Meisha-ann Martin. I'm pretty sure I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, but I'll spell my first name, Meisha-ann, MEIS as in Sam, HA-ANN. I'm on Twitter at Meisha-ann M and workhuman.com. If you go to the resources section, there are all these research goodies there for you, and you don't have to be a client to access it.
Outstanding. Well, Meisha-ann, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being your awesome self. And I can't wait to see you again in person. So hopefully that won't be too long. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was an honor to be here.
Thank you for listening today. To learn more about the People Analytics and Future of Work community, the People Data for Good movement, and to contribute to the ongoing production of podcasts and shows that enable you to stay at the forefront of people analytics, workforce planning, diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee experience, and other themes that are affecting the future of work, then please visit pafal.net. Again, thanks for being here and making great things happen.